Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the build of the FB Jets F15 right here. It's going well. We're probably at about the halfway point. No, yeah, maybe halfway point, I think, on this plane. Let's roll that intro and get started on the next steps. All right, guys, next steps is we are continuing with the fuel system. Once that's installed, then we are going to put the UATs in, and then we are going to put the turbines in. So that's the next things we're working on in this video. And I was thinking about this. If you guys are on Facebook, check out Xicoy Turbines Canada. I haven't really announced that on the channel, but we started a Facebook group, Xicoy Turbines Canada, not specifically for Canada, but I just named it that because there's a couple other Xicoy turbine groups out there. So link down below in the description to the Xicoy Turbines Facebook group. I post updates and stuff on there about the Xicoy turbine lineup and all that kind of stuff. So it's not super busy right now, but it will get busier over the next year. All right, guys, let's dive in to the next steps here. All right, last episode, we got tons of stuff done with all the airlines. Fuel system started. We got the wiring connectors started or mostly completed on the fuselage side. And we're progressing here. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to get these other tanks set up and installed. By the end of this video, I want to have the smoke tank installed and curing, because we're going to use probably silicone to stick it in place. Want to get the turbines installed, the UATs, and all that kind of stuff. And then we're probably going to get the tray figured out next. And so that's where we're at, guys. So lots of good progress so far. We still have lots to do, but next thing we're doing is getting those Sullivan tanks or Dubro tanks set up and ready to install. All right, so the UATs are installed there, guys. Basically, we've got three lines on the UATs. So you've got the center line, which feeds the fuel pump, the intake of the fuel pump side. And you've got the other one of the two lines going to the fuel system. And then the third one is the actual fill line. So I talk about this kind of, I think, almost in every build. But just when you're setting a fuel system up for the first time, best thing to do is just follow the fuel path, just so you don't get confused, right? So I like to do it in reverse. So you're filling up at the UAT, your UAT fills up, the fuel comes out of the top line, and it goes to the pickup line of the first tank or the primary fuel tank, and then it goes out the vent line. If you're adding additional tanks, it goes to the fuel pickup line of the main tank, out the vent line, to the fuel pickup line of the secondary tank, out the vent line. So just follow the fuel path, and it helps to ensure that you don't get confused. Remember when I first started in jets, it was a little bit of a struggle to wrap my head around the way everything works, but that's a simple way for me to just make sure I don't mess anything up. And I always mark all my tanks as well too, so you'll see even on these guys, fuel and vent side. So when you're putting them together, it's easy to know what input is what, and it's easy to keep track of it as well too. So as I mentioned in the last video, we left this line a little bit long so we could hook it up to the tank, install the tank, and we also have to install our vent line as well too, which is going to go right down there to the vents that we installed in the last video. All right, folks, we got tanks installed. Main tanks are installed. Boom. We use silicone, same thing we use for the main tanks, and put that in place. So that's all hooked up. Our vent lines are hooked up. Everything's run to the back, and tanks are good. So before we finish tonight, we're going to have to do a little bit of gluing. So we're going to glue like our 6mm line holders. We're going to glue as much as possible so it's ready for tomorrow. So just doing a little bit of planning at this point. So we've got our trays here for our turbine mounting stuff. So one for each side. So just kind of working on the layout. We want to keep it nice and tidy. And then we've got the main board here as well too, which we were just working on, and that's going to sit underneath the fuselage, but essentially in that area. So lots of good stuff going on. So I think the next thing we're going to do is work on figuring out how we're going to mount the big tray. I think that's the next thing we're going to do. We can't put the engines in until we get the tubing installed on the UATs for the fill line. And we do also want to probably work on the smoke lines, but those will be fairly easy to add to this top former here for the engine mount. So don't really need to worry about that right now. But yeah, we'll wait to get that tubing on. So yeah, next thing we're going to work on is mounting these trays. Once we get the trays figured out, then we'll wrap them in our carbon vinyl that we have. And there it is there. So 3M wrap film 1080 film. This video is not sponsored by 3M, but it could be if 3M, if you're watching and you want to reach out and give us some sponsorship on some film, we wouldn't say no. Anyways, there's the carbon film. It's kind of nice because it has texture, but this is what we're going to be wrapping the trays in. All right, guys, we also got the smoke tank plumbed up as well, so that's all done. We did go with a standard clunk in there, and there is the bung setup. So pretty straightforward. We did paint the intake ducting. It was quite ugly right there on that side, and now it's a little less ugly because it's all gray. So it's going to look a lot better, I think, than the ugly fiberglass look. So that's done. But yeah, so I think the next thing we're focusing on here is, as I mentioned, all of our little blocks and stuff that we're going to put in. So we're going to put one on the back of each of those rails. Hello? And then what we're going to do is put one on top of the ducts is the plan. So I'll show you guys the progress when we're done. All right, everything has been glued, and we also did the plates for the main air tray. So these are the plates that are glued to the tank. Before we install the tank, we need to pressure test the tank and make sure there's no leaks. And then our tray gets installed on top of the smoke tank. And then we've got all of our other stuff glued in. So we glued in our little black keepers there, available on the lightersideofrc.com. And we have these plates, which is what is going to hold the main equipment tray. We're going to screw down into those. The reason we use different sizes is the intake ducts are slightly angled or different sizes. So we needed a 1/2 inch block there, and I think that's probably a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 or something on that side. And then we got our blocks glued back there. So everything is going to be curing until tomorrow. All right, guys, we are ready to continue. We've got a nice supply of Tygon. It's like every builder's dream right there. There's like $65, $70 in Tygon. All right, so we're ready to put the fill lines on the UATs. So that just goes there. When you do that, generally you're using a smaller size. So like the 3/32 is good. And I like to use the 3/32 because fuel dots fit in there. If you're using like a Jersey modeler system, the little plug fits in there. The 1/8, actually, I think the 1/8 is the one that I use. The 3/32 is, I think, small. But anyways, one of those sizes, whatever works for you. So we're going to run those lines forward. You can see the duct piece I put back in last night. That's all painted and looks a little bit prettier than it did before. So once those lines are run forward, then we can install the turbines and start moving forward. So I also clipped in the lines into our little line holders there. And I think the next thing we're going to do is install the turbines after the line is on the UATs. Put the turbines in, and then we'll start wrapping the main plates and stuff there, because all of our blocks are glued on and ready to go. All right, so we got engines installed. We got some of the equipment installed. So just something to keep in mind here, when you're putting your engines in this F15, we had to put the data plug on this turbine and clock it a little bit counterclockwise, about 5 degrees or so, just to have enough room for the cable. And then we hooked that fuel supply cable, which is this one right here, up to the turbine before we installed them. So the turbines are installed. Hopefully that's the last time we have to take them out and they just stay there. We're just playing with some of the equipment layout here, and I think we've got everything kind of laid out where we're going to put it, and it'll work out for a decent layup or layout for everything. and everything will be nice and tidy looking. So the next step for this is we need to wrap the plates. That's Chad's job. Joe, we need you. The FB Jet's F15 is now like under the hood of a brand new vehicle where everything is covered. We should just not mount anything up there. Just put a single logo right in the center. Okay, guys, everything's wrapped. It actually worked out pretty good. We just cut the pieces a little bit bigger than the wooden pieces, so it was hanging over by about half an inch, about an inch randomly, and you can see the difference there. And what we did was heat it and bend it over, and it worked out just great. I think it turned out really well. The nice thing about this is it's lighter than using the plastic stuff that I would typically glue on, so also kind of a nice little plus there. So we've got that all finished. Now the next thing we probably need to do is run the brake lines, because once we start mounting all the turbine stuff on these plates, we lose access to the landing gear. So that's going to be the next thing that we do. Is we're going to probably drop the gear, get the brake lines hooked up. All right, so we got her flipped upside down on the hood stand, and we put our carbon rods on the wheels. So this one's got, so I guess that's the left wheel, has a decent amount of toe in. This one here has a little bit too much toe in, so we're going to have to straighten that one out. Now this these wheels sit a little bit angled like that, but there's no other way to install them. So anyways, we've got to take that apart a little bit and give her a little bit of a rotate treatment. Now Chad did preemptively red Loctite all of these, so they may be a bit of a bear to get out, but we can do it. We've got the technology and the heat. So we're going to adjust this leg, this right leg, and get that a little bit more even with the other side. And then once that's done, we're going to run the brake lines, but we'll show you guys the final result of tackling that. All right, guys, gear is all installed, done, and all that kind of beautiful stuff. So we took the screws out, treated the holes with CA. We got the lines for the brakes all run. So just to show you how we did those, basically we ran them down the legs first here. You can see there, just follows all the scissor linkages, comes down, and then there's a nice little loop down here. That is, we've used zip ties and some shoe goop to keep the zip tie from moving on the side. And you can see that the loop just moves up and down nicely, completely interference free. So when you do brake lines, that's a great way to do it. Make sure you double checking those things, making sure that it's not going to get hung up on anything, obviously. So the main gear is done. We did adjust the angle of the right one just a little bit, so they're pretty close. This one's got a little bit more angle on it, but it's within a degree or two, I would say. So gear is now done. Brake lines are basically run. We're just going to snake the rest of the brake line through, and then we'll flip this thing back over and get it on the stand. All right, so about an hour and a half ago, I filled this up with pressure from my mouth to leak test it. So we're going to pull one of the little plugs out, and if we hear a... Oh, look at that. Even smells like alcohol. So at this stage here, basically we cannot start, well, you can, but not really a good idea. You don't want to just start mounting stuff. You want to kind of plan things out. When we think about our ECUs that are going to be mounted here, what do we have? We've got our data turbine data cable, which is this one right here, so that's fine. We've got to run our GSU, our throttle input from the receiver, which is going to be up here. So we want to have some way to mount wires and stuff coming to this area. So that's going to have to happen. And we don't need to plan that out now. We just need to have this in our minds. So we're also going to need to have the smoke stuff coming to the back. And that's basically everything we need to run rearward at this point. So just some stuff to think about. I think the next thing we're going to focus on is that tray for the smoke tank. Just getting that all finished up, so at the end of tonight we can glue the smoke tank into the airframe. So what we're going to do with the tray is it's going to be roughly this size, and all of our air valves and everything are going to be on that tray. So we want to put a screw in on the back side, and we're going to keyhole the tray, and the tray is going to just slide in, and then we've got 2 screws at the front here that actually screw it down, because there's very little access back here when it's installed in the airframe. So we're going to get this piece cut. We can essentially make it as wide as possible so it takes up this entire space or really close to it, and it's going to be sitting roughly in that area when the tank's installed. All right guys, so tray is done. We've got the 2 screws at the front here that ultimately hold the tray down. These back ones, they're just keyholed, so basically you can slide the tray forward and it comes off. So because this tray is visible, we're going to cover this with the carbon vinyl as well and make it look all pretty. We've got room for all of our air valves, and we're also going to put the smoke valve or the smoke pump right on the front. And the nice thing about that is we've got like a tiny little lead going to the smoke pump feed, which is perfect. So that's going to work wonderfully. We will have to tee off this to fill the tank, but at least it's a nice small lead for the pickup for the smoke pump. All right, folks. So next step or next big accomplishment is going to be to get this tray completed, programmed, and installed on top of the smoke tank. So what we need to do with all of this is plan everything out. So the way we've got this set up is we've got 2 valves that are going to work the gear. So we've got one for the mains, one for the nose gear. We've got one for the, we'll call it the primary doors, one for the secondary doors. So one of these door sets will open and close at each stage. One of these door sets will open and close and not change at each stage. That'll make more sense in a little bit. So we've got the Xicoy programmer, which is what we're going to set this entire system up in. And we've got the data terminal where we do all of our programming. So the easiest way to think about this is in steps. Now I covered all of this in the SkyMaster F15 build. So the first step I'm going to do here is we're going to draw all of the steps out. And once you see that, it'll make more sense. So what you want to do is you want to have your open condition laid out, your closed condition laid out, and then you work in between to figure out the different steps. So I'll write this all out so you can see it visually, and then we'll program this into the Xicoy Failsafe. So all right, so I was looking through my old paperwork and I actually found my worksheet for when I built my last F15, my yellow aircraft F15. So the only thing that's going to change on this is we're going to have 2 gear valves, but basically in this case we had one output or slot for the gear, one for doors, another one for doors. So if you look at the way this works, and this is how you want to do the programming on the Xicoy sequencer. So you basically have your final condition on one side and your final condition on the other side. So in this case, gear down, in this case, gear up, and then you've got all the steps in between. So at each of these steps, you have to define what everything's doing. So on gear down, you've got the gear valve open, you've got one set of doors open, and you've got another set of doors closed. So to go from gear down to gear up, what's going to happen is on step number 1, one of the sets of doors, so output 3 opens. So now all the doors are open. Step number 2, the gear closes or comes up. The doors remain open. Step number 3, you can just copy this one and that adds more time. And then step number 4, the gear is still closed, but the doors close to completely close the airframe and the gear's all up. And then when you do the gear down, it's the exact opposite. So it goes through step number 3, through step number 2, the gear doors open, the gear is still up. Step number 1, the gear comes down. The final step, gears down, doors are open, and one set of door is closed. So when you're programming the failsafe itself, you just go through at each one of these steps and you define what is going to happen. All right, guys, I'm not really sure how much of this I want to capture in the video, but I'll just give you a quick rundown here of what's going on with the units. So Tells you the position right now. So right now we're in the gear down position. And if you look at the radio, gear switch here, gear down is forward always for me. So we are in the gear down position. So it's pretty simple cycling through these menus. So these are all your doors or your outputs on your unit itself. It shows you everything there. So when you push the up arrow, it starts to get into all the settings. So it tells you your radio input first, but then you get all your different settings. So sequencer out position, this is where you do all your adjustments. We'll come back to that. Radio setup, that's where you adjust gear up, gear down. Servo position, we're not going to play with that because we're using electronic valves. Sequence delay, this is where you set the how much time's in between each one of those steps. LED setup, you can set up an external LED light, I think, or what the LEDs show on the unit. Pressure setup, whether you're using PSI or bar, and you can also adjust the pressure sensor. Telemetry setup, that's pretty straightforward. Power up setup, so this tells the unit what to do when you power up everything. So immediate action does exactly what your radio is telling it to do. And there's two other settings in there, so there's safety things. So it'll tell if you pick one of the settings, you have to do a full gear cycle in order for it to give you control. And there's a couple different options in there. But ultimately, if you're setting one of these things up, refer to the manual. The manual is going to get most of those basic settings all taken care of for you. But when we go to the sequence out position, this is where that little chart is basically what you need to use in order for this to happen. So when you go into this menu, okay, so gear down position. So if we hit the up arrow, this goes to our output 1 and tells it what to do. Okay, so if we hit the up arrow, it's going to go to output 2 and tells it what to do. And that's where having this chart makes programming this stuff really, really easy. And then what you can also do is plug these valves into the Xicoy unit, and you'll see exactly what's happening with the unit itself. So I'm going to get all this stuff programmed in here. I'm not going to bore you with getting everything programmed, but basically what you do is you go through each of these steps, tell it whether it's open or close. Once that's done, I'll show you guys what it looks like with all the valves. Actually ended up using this exact same layout. The reason we use the same layout is because we actually wide the first two valves, the gear valves. So basically we've got 3 outputs that we're using, and that's going to make everything work beautifully. So we copied the exact layout from my previous F15. Now if you watch this, so right now the gear is down. So when I flick the gear up switch, you're going to see that output number 3 is going to open, and then it's just going to go through the cycle. So output 3 opens, gear closes, so it comes up, and then now 2 and 3 is going to close, so gear is up. Now when we flick the switch for gear down, you're going to see both doors open, so 2 and 3 is going to open, gear is going to open, and door 3 is going to close. There we go. So everything's programmed. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we've got everything laid out properly on the board, and we've got everything marked properly. So we know which valve is the doors that open and close when the gear is up and down, which one is the doors that stay open and closed, and then we want to get our outputs marked as well too, output A, output B, so we know what is doing what. So I'm going to get all that stuff organized next, and then we'll get stuff laid out on the tray and make it nice and pretty looking. All right guys, so here is our main air board. Now you can see why we needed this to be in a reasonable position so we can get things organized, why we needed a decent amount of space, because you need a lot of air valves for an F15. As soon as you have 2 sets of doors that do different things, that's basically it. So what we did at this point is we marked each valve up. So we've got them marked with a paint marker, so gear, gear, main doors, closing doors, and then we've got the air line itself marking what's happening. So down and up, open, close, because we've got all of our gear stuff labeled a certain way. So main gear, blue is up, gray is down. Doors, white is up, black is down. And I've learned all this from experience. That's where it comes from. I've screwed up a lot of these systems before and had to fix them. And if you plan out things like this, then it just works. These two valves are going to be brake, and the operational canopy locks is what that one's for. So, and then we're going to put the smoke pump, as we discussed, right on the front. So next thing to do is get this all sorted out as far as the air system goes. There's quite a bit of screwing down and all this stuff, and then when you plumb these things, you have to plumb them and have them neatly plumbed with T's, because you have to have a way to go to your next valve. So this is going to be a bit of a long process, but all you're doing is basically making this as organized and neat as possible. All right, guys, as a last step tonight, we got the tank installed in the front part of the airframe, and we just basically put some silicone on the bottom of the former that sits in the halfway point, and some right there where the tank intersects with the ducts. All right, so the main electronics board is done, guys. Basically, we've got everything laid out. So just to give you an explanation here, these are the two gear valves. They are wide into channel 1, and then we've got our two door valves that we've discussed. So if you look at the air input, which is right here, okay, that feeds the entire door and gear system, and then we've got it teed off here to our failsafe. So this is all connected into one system, and then what's going to happen is this line is going to go forward to the main equipment tray, where it's going to intersect with the air fill valve, and also the main air supply is going to be there as well too. So that's how everything's going to plug in. It's going to be nice and simple. These two valves are for the other things, and we will plumb those as we need to. Smoke pumps right there. The vent line's going to come off and go right down below the tank right there. So all that's been done. We did have the smoke tank previously mounted. Wasn't happy with the silicone that was holding it in, and so we pulled it out, and we're going to redo it at the end of tonight. So that's the completion so far. All right, so we're just working on laying things out here, and we got the receiver mounted, but one of the struggles with these new Powerbox receivers, this is the AR20310T, the 20 channel receiver, is they put a bind plug button, on the top of this receiver. So normally fine, but I guess in a situation like this where you're installing the hatch over and over again, you do run into the risk of potentially hitting that bind button. Now there is a bind plug still on the receiver, so you can use the bind plug. So that's one of the concerns that we have with putting the receiver there. It's nice for accessibility if you have to change anything or just having it out in the open. The alternative is to bury it somewhere in the front. The problem is that it's buried in the front. So we can put it on the back of the equipment tray or the air tray. So there is still room back here. But if you're to do that, when the nose is on, you have zero access back there. We can also put it in the front of the nose right here, which is also a viable option as well too, and probably not a terrible one. So that's something we'll take a look at. But this is what we spend a lot of time doing when we're doing a jet like this, is just staring and thinking and staring and thinking, and that's about it. Made a decision to take the main receiver and put it in the nose. So previously at the back end of the nose section, we had talked about putting a plate in one of the first videos. We're actually going to put the plate in. I can't even remember what we were originally putting the plate there for. So we're going to put the air system up there, but obviously we didn't, and that's where we're going to put the receiver. So the receiver essentially is going to sit right in this area right there, and we've got all of our leads and stuff which are long enough, and we've got good access. So that's good. Now we've played around a little bit with the tray layout, and it's going to be nice and simple. We are creating a flux capacitor on this plane. Now if you're young enough and you do not know what the flux capacitor is, I highly suggest you go watch Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. I think that's all there was. and learn what a flux capacitor is. All right, guys, we did some measuring here and we kind of got some things figured out. We don't have a ton of room in this area. Essentially, we've got the triangle space here. So this is the room that we have in between the ducts and the back of the smoke tank. So that's the area that we've got. So that's how we're going to lay out the air inputs for that area. Then we're going to have the smoke on-off valve sitting right in that kind of area. So the rest of the stuff's pretty straightforward because we got lots of space underneath where the gear is, but that was the trickiest one. So we just did some measuring and figuring and sorting, and we are good to go. Guys, we have the smoke tank back installed. Everything is pretty much routed, ready to run, ready to install the main plate. Last steps gluing tonight. We glued a couple more keepers for the brake line going forward on both tanks. The smoke tank is reinstalled with some caulking, and then we've got our main board very, very close to being completed. So obviously the GSUs aren't installed yet, but we've got the smoke line and then all the air fill lines. GSUs are going to be mounted there. We're going to have the primary on-off switch on one side right in this area and the light on-off switch in that side. So it's going to be a nice, simple layout for the board. And then we've got the flux capacitor going there. And then the other thing we glued tonight was the board that our receiver is going to mount on. So that's the one you can see right there. Didn't treat it with carbon vinyl because it's going to be hidden and you'll never see it. So anyways, that's done and it'll be set tomorrow. All right, folks, it's the next day and the tank is sort of solid. I don't know if I'm overly excited about the tank setup, so we're going to make a little bit of a modification here. So what I did is I made this cardboard template. It's going to be hard to show you, but this section here gets glued to the side of the tank in that little curve. And then this section gets screwed into the former, and that's just going to make the entire tank setup much stronger and more solid. Just with the way this works, we've got so much weight hanging out over the front of the tank, I'd like to have some additional support. So I made the cardboard spacer, cut out my pieces of carbon laminated stuff that came with the kit, and you'll see that I made them a little bit narrower this way, and the reason for that is we don't want them too wide, because if we ever have to take that tank out and they're too wide, we won't get it past this front section there. I don't suspect we ever will, but you know, 5 years down the road, we don't want to have that issue. So that's why they're cut a little bit shorter. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold these up in place and drill the pilot hole there through the former, get this screwed into place, and then glue it afterwards. So that should work. So I'm going to work on that. It's going to be a bit of a struggle because we're in such a small space. It would have been smarter to do this beforehand, but then now we actually get everything lined up to the former properly. So both ways are good, but that is what I'm working on now. All right, some of you guys have asked about the bits that I use in my Dremel, as I haven't really been specific about them. So these are my three most common bits that I use. I think this is a Dremel brand one, but I'm not 100% sure. But I get these at our Princess Auto. You guys down in the US, McMaster Car, I think. And anyway, so this is the one I use to get rid of material. This is the same thing. This one's actually almost a little bit more aggressive because of the point, but of course this one's easier to get a flat surface with, but either one of those works good. And then for like right now, I'm going to cut out the switch points in this tray. So I'm going to use this bit because it's narrow enough, and then you can plunge that right in because it's got the biting surface all the way to the tip. So hopefully that gives you guys an idea of what I use. Those are the three most common bits that I use. I don't really use anything else. I've got a couple other ones like this guy here, so similar to that one, but don't really use that one very much. So anyways, that's what I use. All right, guys, that is everything for this episode of the FB Jets F15 build. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the build so far. Thank you so much for the support on the channel and watching my videos. I do appreciate it. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, guys. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button down below. And don't forget, if you have a moment, check out my website, thelightersideofrc.com. There's a link down below in the description. And we've got lots of fun stuff on there, plus the store as well, too. So we were making great progress on this plane, guys. We will probably get the nose bolted on the next episode. So thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next time.